tuned into our series with Kevin Annette, exposing the horrors of the Catholic Church. Some of you are aware that my own mum, her mum was told that she was going to burn in hell if she had a baby out of wedlock, and the Catholics forced my mum into a forced adoption, which traumatized her from being a baby. And Russ here was traumatized by Dominican Catholic nuns, which we are about to get into. And Russ has also got his links down there. We've got the book Facing the Broken Healer Crisis, A Fire Tender's Journey Through the Healing Arts. And there's other books as well, Moments in the Death of a Flesh Mechanic, A Man Among Helpers. And he's got his anti-war song, and he's got his contact information down there as well. So a huge thank you for coming on, Russ. Before we get into what happened with the nuns then, you know, what was your life like as a kid?
As a kid, well, you know, I want to start off thanking you for this. This is a real opportunity for me because I'm going to be dead soon, and I'm 74 years old now, and I've been in a process of really going into a life review, and mostly focused around what do I still have left to offer, you know. So to be honest with you, the lead into this was I was attracted to the work that you were doing with Kevin Annette, right? Is that correct? Yeah. And I started watching those podcasts, and it brought me back to a time in my life that I hadn't really looked at for quite some time, you know. And you know, as clickbait to attract you, I told you a little bit about my story, about my experience, childhood experience with Dominican nuns, and that attracted you. But my larger goal is to make use of everything that I have, that of which, you know, that's a part of it. Now it's receded into the background quite a bit, but in that process, I rediscovered some work that I had done that turned out to be a very good thing for a lot of people. And we can go about that later. And so, you know, what I usually say is many years ago, my parents came over to the United States from the old country to build a better life for themselves. So they left me in Brooklyn and took the boat back to Italy. And that's a metaphor. It's not actually the truth, but it's a metaphor from my childhood, because leading into your question is that as a child, I felt completely alone. I felt abandoned. And it was on multi levels, which you might say the experience in Catholic school was kind of like the icing on top, the bitter icing on top. But I was raised in a my mother was touch phobic, so I didn't get breastfed. That probably started the whole mess off. And my father wasn't very present back then. My earliest remembrance of childhood is that I would go to bed and my parents would be yelling at each other downstairs, and it was overall tense environment. My mother was really well, she was kind of nuts, you know. I'll tell you about that later. But yeah, I felt pretty much abandoned and alone. And then at 5 years old, I entered Catholic grammar school. And that's where the trauma is really cooked up. But overall, I grew up in fear. I grew up in abject fear. I was told that growing up in Brooklyn, Irish Catholic neighborhood, grew up in a Trump home, actually. It was Trump's dad. He took over these huge blocks and turned them into attached houses. And that's where I lived. And I was afraid of the kids on the block. I was told constantly that they were beneath me, beneath my class, not as sophisticated. So I feared them. I was not physically, I was physically, I would say, incompetent. I never really, well, I would say because at an early age, I kind of left my body from various forms of abuse, psychological and physical, with the nuns, not with my mom. Um, and leaving my body, I was completely out of step with physicality. So I didn't go out and run around with the other kids. And um, I lived across the street from a park, and the park was 3/4 concrete. Even the ball fields, which you couldn't really slide home because you would turn into a bloody mess. But I thought that there was a little section of it that had some trees and benches and stuff, and I thought all that stuff was imported. I thought that the normal way of being was asphalt and concrete. You know, every house had a big tree in front of it, but I was dissociated from that. So I grew up pretty much in a state of fear, is what I recall. And it was a very isolated environment, which, you know, in the ensuing years, this is part of my nature, is to be a loner and to be my own best friend. But the early years were very tough. It took me, well, honestly, it took me until beginning college before I felt like I could socially mix in with other people and
Russ,
feel
Russ, let me just pause you there. Let's go over this a bit more slowly.
sure.
So at 5 years old, you go to the school with the nuns. What was your first day like?
That's great. My first day, my mother dragged me to the parochial school, and um, there was a concrete holding area, a yard, and the 1 through 8th grade, 1A and 1B, 60 kids in a classroom, and they would line up according to the class that they were in. So when I went in there, what happens is some kids get left behind. They don't make the grade the year before. And the kids that were left behind were instructed to go into the lower class level, lower class line, and they would fight. They would fight. They would go into the next class where all their friends were. And the nuns swooped down like a bunch of bats from hell and grabbed them by the ears, started slapping them, pushing them around, uh, traumatizing them, you know. And this was my first view. It scared the crap out of me. And that was the first day. That was the very start. My first grade, when I was 5 years old, was pretty good. In fact, one of the sisters there in charge of the choir she worked with me in choir and singing, and that became a direct line between me and God, between me and my higher power. And that has sustained me significantly through my life. But in sixth grade, everything changed. Sister Ann Robert took the liberty because I was deemed, at then IQ tests were very popular. And I had the third highest IQ in the class. So she took that opportunity to beat me every chance she could because I was lazy. So I would say a couple of times a month, I would get reprimanded and beaten. And this was through the whole school, especially
What methods did they use to beat you, Russ?
rulers, pointers, pull your pants down in front of the class, and hand slapping, you're pulling, stuff like that. I mean, just I look back at it, and that was just kind of a way of life. That you went into that atmosphere, and there they were, just picking on kids. The emotional abuse was rife. Insulting parents, everybody around you. The girls, there's girls and boys mixed in, but there was a kind of a wall between the sexes that you couldn't really cross. So normal development was kind of out of the question with that. And that lasted through the full 8 years. It went to a peak in sixth grade. I stuck my tongue out at a nun, and next thing nun after nun after nun, handing me from nun to nun to nun, beating me, pulling my ear, slapping, rulers, then down to the principal's office, and she beat me, with a pointer for a god-awful period of time. So much so that I had welts on my ass for a year. And I went home and I told my mom, and I showed her the welts, and she grabbed me and we went down to the convent. And then I sat in the vestibule. She went back there with the nuns. And then she came out about 15 minutes later and never said a word to me. Never said a word what happened, the confrontation she had with the nuns, nothing. And that's been a sore point, a very sore point in my life. That absence, I've always wondered, and I'll never have the answer, what did they tell her? She was a devout Catholic and believed all the hellfire and stuff. And, I think they probably threatened her with hell if she said anything about it or did anything more.
You got a question from a viewer, Marie.
Yeah.
Marie wants to know, what is a pointer? How is a pointer used?
A pointer in the old classrooms is just a simple round rod, wooden rod that is somewhat flexible, so it really snaps. I realized, it's interesting. As I got older, when I would get a massage, when they would get down towards my left cheek, I would uncontrollably flinch and tighten up and whatever. It took me years to realize. And then one day, while going through that therapy, I realized that that was because they were mostly right-handed, and that was the cheek that took the most abuse, and it lives in you, it lives in you for a long time. So I would say the peak of my dissociation from my body was back then, about started at 6 years old. I had to. I mean, I was getting beaten all the time. All the kids, all the boys were getting beaten. So, yeah, that kind of characterizes it. And the details of it to me have taken a real back step. I'd like to go into the blog that I started.
Okay, Russ, before we go to your blog, I've just got a
Yeah.
few more questions about this time in
Sure.
your life, if that's okay.
Sure.
All right. So this school then, was it a school where you went in the morning and you came home in the evening, or was it a boarding school?
No. It was a day school.
Day
Classes.
school?
Yeah, we got out at 3:00.
All right. So, you've described really well, and it's harrowing. You going in there your first day and how the punishments got worse going into the next year. So how did you adapt to that? Did you have any support from friends at the school? Was there anyone you could confide in?
No, absolutely not. I mean, it was a huge period of isolation and loneliness for all that time. Is it you just didn't talk with each other about. I mean, people don't talk to each other about their trauma, period, in life, and it was no different back then, and even exacerbated by the youth and the insecurities of youth.
So what was your game plan then? Were you just going in each day and just trying to get through the day without getting punished?
Pretty much. Yeah. I mean, I hated school. I hated book learning. I was bored most of the time. I was bored. The only thing that kept me going was a sense of self at my core. But that was personal between me and God.
And what about friends? You didn't have any friends at all?
Yes, kids on the block interactions, but I was bullied a lot. I was very insecure in so many ways. No, friends wasn't a real. I had like one or two friends over the course of those 8 years that I really, to me, a friend was the most valuable thing in the world. So like if I had someone who treated me kindly, then I latched on to him. I had a couple over the course of those 8 years, but not much.
So are you saying that you were bullied at the school or after school?
Not so much at the school because there was tight discipline around. But after school, periodically. I mean, it wasn't all the time, but I mean, I felt bullied, by life. I felt insecure. I did not feel. I did not have a sense of personal empowerment, around that. So I was vulnerable.
And how many years of punishment did you go through with the nuns?
Well, from second grade till 8th grade.
And for the people of England, what are the ages of those grades?
Okay, well, this was um, well, I started early. I started at 5 years old, so 5 until 13, something like that.
Okay. So as you got older, then did the punishments differ?
Not really, not really, not really. What differed, I would say, would be my awareness that the nuns took glee in what they did. You know, you could see it in their eyes that they love beating up kids. And secondarily, is that no nun ever came to the defense. The nuns that weren't beating you were silent. So you went through this, you know. Uh, just is just the way of being. You know,
Did you ever see
they
did you ever see other kids stand up to the nuns?
no, I saw kids run, you know, run out of the school and then come back a few days later with their parents and very well behaved. You know, God knows how the parents got threatened.
What were the worst punishments, not just for you, but for other kids, perhaps?
Uh, you know, it was pretty standardized. Whacked with the ruler, whacked with the pointer, whacked with a yardstick, slapped, ears pulled, uh, stuff like that was routine. You know, I would say, um, yeah.
And
And
when they pulled your pants down in front of the class, I mean, that must have been really humiliating.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. There were times when, we had inquisitions. All right, I had one friend at the time when we were out in. It was a very hot summer day, and we were running around town and overheated, absolutely thirsty. So he lured me into the back of the church, and in the church, you know, they have the holder of holy water. You know, so he went and he got down there and he drank a few gulps, and then said, go ahead, do it." And I was scared to death to do it, but I did it. And then I knocked over the urn of holy water, and it was a huge scandal in the church because at that time, supposedly, you could not have holy water blessed by anyone but the Monsignor of the parish or the bishop. And so it turned into a huge inquisition where for a week they took the kids out into the hall, the boys especially, and they beat everyone up in the class with pointers, pulling their pants down, and until somebody gave it up. Nobody gave it up. I went to confession, and I told the priest the next week I got pulled out and I got busted,
Mhm.
and so then a whole another round of beatings.
Wow. Did the nuns ever bring priests in to who also abused, did any abuse, or was they absent?
I never really saw that. The priests were like a whole different world, you know. 20 nuns to a priest, something like that. You know, well, that's probably not quite accurate. I would say 10 nuns to a priest. And the major abuse, I never really, outside of the priest breaking the laws of the confessional, you know, I didn't have many run-ins with the priests.
Did you have to do a lot of religious education?
Oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Indoctrination. and with hell always being held up and being told that you're going to go, if you chew the host, if you receive communion, chew the host, and you get hit by a car, right to hell. Stuff like that. So really, it took me, a good 14 years to unlearn everything that I learned in Catholic school.
So, what were the major things that happened to you over the years in Catholic school?
The major things?
Yep.
Indoctrination, physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse in terms of me learning to despise my manhood. The nuns made sure that the boys were not able to be men, I guess. And relationship with women, certainly that affected me my whole life through.
Could you explain what you mean by that? The nuns made sure the boys couldn't be men.
To have that natural energy, that natural drive, that natural curiosity, that natural rambunctiousness that kids have, that boys have especially, that was suppressed. If you acted like you were moving forward or even a little bit interesting girls or whatever, you were slapped. The abuse is the sudden disruption of your experience, and violent disruption of your experience. So when you were acting like a little boy, you got trounced on. What does that do? That means natural impulses are suppressed. You do it as a protective mechanism. It's inevitable.
As you're approaching teenager, do you start to rebel?
I'm not sure what you mean by rebel, because it certainly set me, well, yeah, okay. Respect for authority, gone. By the time I was 13 years old, respect for authority was gone, because these are God's representatives on earth, and they're pretty damn evil. So it's a part of my being now. My skepticism about authority. Anybody that comes towards me saying that they know best, or whatever. I mean, it's a defining characteristic of my life, and I love it. You know what I mean? The root, I have to say, that the basis of who I have become was set in those years. My whole life has been kind of overcoming that consistent attempt to strip me of sense of self, and it's defined everything I've done since. Looking back, I would say, well, it led me into a lifetime, a good 30 years in the human growth and potential movement, where a lot of that time was spent coming to terms with the childhood that I had to live through. And that's been a driving force. And it's helped me learn so much about myself and human nature that there's a part of me that's thankful. I mean, when I was a kid, I did not think that the world was anywhere worth going into, and so, but as I grew older, as I learned to make my way, overcoming the psychological blocks that I had and learning more about them, it drove me deep into understanding the human condition, and actively working in that my whole life. So basically, sculpting crap. You know what I mean? I mean, I learned, yeah, that was my starting point, and that really formed my personality, and it put me on a lifetime path that had to do more with healing than it had to do with holding on to trauma.
So, Russ, you said that you viewed the nuns as God's representative on earth and that they were evil. So, did that make you question God?
Oh, certainly. Certainly. Except, I would say in the very early years, I got that connection. And I did recognize that the God that is a whole lot different than the God that was presented to me and jammed down my throat. And that has sustained me. In my lifetime, God has taken many, many different faces, and they've all been, all been good. It's been a driving force of my life. Relationship is good, and perhaps you could say because of that early adversity, um, it it strengthened my relationship and caused me to seek other faces of God. What's another side of this creator, this force that brought me into life? You know,
So, so throughout all of those years, then, when you were at the school with the nuns, did your parents just acquiesce?
oh yeah, yeah, very much. I mean, my father was, Showtime Catholic. He'd make a show for church on Sunday after being severely nagged by my mom. And my mother was completely involved in it to the point of abuse of the whole family if they did not conform, did not embrace the church and all its teachings and all that. Yeah, it was pretty weird.
So, what was it like then, as you were at the age where you were about to leave this school?
Well, when I left the school, I grew up in Brooklyn. Then we moved out to Huntington, Long Island, and I went to uh, Walt Whitman High School. And I remember the first day of class, uh, they were doing the roster in the homeroom, and I was listening, and I heard all these names that I never heard before. And then as they're going down the list, and they get to Marshall Gimple, and I cracked up. I almost died. I had to cover my face. I had never heard many Jewish names in my early experience. So I put my head down on the desk, and I just laughed hysterically, muffling my sounds, because I'd never heard anything as strange as that in my life.